Okay, so I have to warn you a little bit. This session contains a little bit of code, not a lot actually. But who in the audience actually works into software engineering? Okay, well that's good. It's some kind of a software engineering track, so I'm glad that there's a couple of software engineers here. Who is a developer? Quite a few. Who's a tester? BA, PM. Okay, and probably a couple of others as well. Who is not into software engineering at all in this audience? Nobody. Okay, so everybody will understand this. So I'm using a little bit of Java. You'll understand what this is all about. You don't need to be able to actually program to understand what I'm going to say. I've only have half an hour, so I have one message to tell you, because otherwise I would go on forever. So my name is Gino Marckx. I lead the Agile Competency Center for EPAM globally. Now you might be wondering why I'm talking about forgetting about Agile, right? So hopefully that all becomes clear in the end. This is a session about software craftsmanship and why it is important, right? So unfortunately, to explain what I mean with this sentence and what I mean with this title, Forget About Agile, I need to start with the Agile Manifesto. So who's heard of the Agile Manifesto? Quite a number of people. There's some that haven't heard of the Agile Manifesto at all, so I'm assuming that Agile might be new to some of you. So what is Agile? Agile is a principle-based approach to software engineering. And really what it tries to do is it tries to deliver software to the customers faster, as fast as possible, while the features that the customer wants are still valuable, or the implementation of it is still valuable. And let's cut out all of the crap that typically is also in the Agile Manifesto and focus on those 4 values. So those are the 4 values, the principles almost, that make up the Agile Manifesto. It also has 12 principles, specific principles, but I'm not going to go into this because this is what most people remember. So it's a principle-based approach. It's for software engineering. But honestly, when you look at it, I don't see any software engineering in there, right? When I look at it a little bit closer, I can actually distinguish 2 separate groups. So one is like working as a team, individuals and processes, or individuals and interactions, sorry, over processes and tools. It's really about how we work together as a team, right? Not about software engineering at all. It could just as well be a hockey team or a soccer team. And the second group, and yeah, granted, customer collaboration is also working as a team, but I'm actually focusing on the software delivery team itself. And the next thing is actually building the right thing, making sure that we build the right piece of software, instead of building something that the customer doesn't need, doesn't want, cannot use, right? So those are the kinds of things that we're focusing on. But nowhere in the Agile Manifesto do I see anything about building it right, anything about software craftsmanship. Now, I'm a software engineer. Lots of you are software engineers as well. So you must care about building something right. When I build software, I want to be able to show it to my colleagues and say like, hey, look at this. This is what I've built. I'm really proud of it. And it has a great design and all of those kinds of things. That to me means building it right. That's really important to me. So it's not in the Agile Manifesto, and the Agile Manifesto focuses on building the right things and working together as a team. And as a result, unfortunately, an awful lot of customers, an awful lot of companies, and an awful lot of teams have forgotten about the software craftsmanship aspect of it, right? And that's really what I want to talk about today. So there was another person who identified this back in 2008, and you probably know him. It's Robert Martin. Who knows Robert Martin? So yeah, also known as Uncle Bob. You might know him better as that. So he actually said, we need a 5th value in the Agile Manifesto. Apart from the 4 that are already there, we also need craftsmanship over crap. We don't want to produce crap, we want to produce craftsmanship. We want to make sure that what we build is built well, is built to last, right? To last forever, if you will. So when I think about software engineering, and when I think about building it right, I basically focus on 2 main things. The first thing is, it needs to be high quality. If I say that I build a piece of software right, it shouldn't contain any bugs. My customers, my users need to be able to use it and go through it smoothly without any unexpected results, right? And the second thing, it needs to be maintainable. So who's ever Who's ever actually been in a software project where the customer asks for a very small change, and you come up with an yeah, you already know what I'm going to say. We come with an estimate like, yeah, you know what? It's going to take us like 2 months to do that. And the customer asks, really? The application was built for, let's say, Polish zloty, right? And we now need the support for euro, and suddenly it's 2 months to build this in, right? So I believe that maintainability and extensibility is something really, really important for quality of software engineering. So this is really what I'm interested in. This is what I, as a software engineer, am interested in. Okay, so let's go back to the Agile Manifesto and look at those two things, those two categories of messages actually that we get from the manifesto. And let's see if we can do something with that, with bad code as well, right? Oh, there's one warning that I didn't give you. You will see bad code today, right? I've written it. So, let's start with this one. Working as a team. One of those practices that Agile actually prescribes is collective code ownership. Who does not know what collective code ownership is? And don't be shy, you can just say it. Okay, good. So, I'll explain it. So, collective code ownership basically means that your entire team that works together on the code owns every single piece of the code. That means that if you need to make a change to your code, and you somehow find in some specific library that this library would benefit from having an extra method, then you can add that method. You do not need to go to the team that owns that library and ask them, will you please add that method? You can add it yourself. The team as a whole actually owns the code. The code is not owned by individual people for individual components, which makes it an awful lot easier to add features, right? Because you don't always have to wait for other people. So collective code ownership. So what does that mean? Collective code ownership means that I got the task suddenly to make a change in the code, and I need to look through some of the code that I have not written, right? But I need to change it. So let's see if we can do that. I told you there was going to be bad code. So you can probably look at that. For people who know Java, and this should not be too difficult to understand. So let's see. Does anybody know what this thing does? It's a class. It doesn't really do anything, but it gives you an opportunity to do something. Does anybody know what this does? I'll give you a minute. Represents some person with an address. Yeah, that's pretty accurate. So yeah, that's kind of what it does, but I really don't know how to deal with it, and especially not when I first look at the code. The implementation is left out. You see that here, right? So the implementation is left out. But let's go through it bit by bit. Let's look at the first piece. So these are the elements of that class, which is called person. And there are a couple of things in there. Indeed, as you said, it's got a name, so it represents a person, but also an address. There's like two things at the same time. What is it really? Is it a person or is it an address? What are we dealing with here, right? So this is something that is already quite difficult to understand. Now let's look at the second thing. These are the constructors. So these are the methods basically that you use to create a new object of this particular class. Does anybody know which one I should use? It's kind of hard, eh? Right, I really don't know. I mean, the first one has a country, and the second one, and it seems that all of the variations of those constructors are all about the address and not really about the person. So yeah, that's kind of hard. So I wouldn't really know which one to use in the first place. And now look at the other things that are in this interface. Add some person, add a person to a person, what would that give? And you get a list of friends. Okay, that makes it a little bit more clear. Maybe we're talking about friends here. Maybe you can add friends to a person object, and you can associate this person with some other friends, and then get a list of those friends. Now let's look at the last thing. I have no clue what that means. Do you guys know? Between relations? Yeah, between. Maybe, what does it mean? How many people are between? How many people do these people have in common? How many Facebook friends do they have in common? I have no clue what that means. And the last one, closest friend. Is that your best friend? Right? You say that again? Personal strength. Oh, okay, yeah. Well, yeah. So there's a couple of different things, but it's really hard to understand what this is all for. So this is really, really hard. So I, as a software engineer that need to change this code, have no clue what I'm changing. So even though we have this practice called collective code ownership, what do you think I'm going to do with this code? Refactor? That would be the right answer. What I'm really going to do with this code, because I'm pressured by my product owner, and for people who don't know that, the product owner is actually the person who defines what goes into the product. I'm pressured by my product owner, project manager, by whoever, right, to deliver this change as fast as possible. I don't have time to refactor all this crap. What I'm going to do is I'm not going to change it at all. So the next person that comes along will go through exactly the same problems, we'll see exactly the same thing, we'll have to go through every single detail of the code, including all the implementations, to really understand what this code does. And I bet you, if this interface looks so bad, you can imagine that the implementation of the interface looks really bad as well, right? So really, it's hard to understand. You can't really work with it. So yeah, what I did is, because I'm not one of those people, and indeed, I'm a software engineer, and I want this to be good, so I refactor. I refactor the code. And I change this code, and I'm renaming a couple of variables, I'm renaming a couple of parameters, maybe renaming a couple of methods as well. And one of the things that I do as well is I identify this dual purpose of this class. It's both a person and an address. And I extracted the address from it. And all of that, obviously, I do not now, because I'm not such a fast typer. So I end up with something that looks similar to this. And does anybody know what this code does now? Maybe this is a little bit clearer. Is this clearer? Who thinks it's clearer? Well, I think it's more understandable, right? So this code does exactly the same thing as the previous thing. And I can prove that. So if anybody wants to challenge me on that, just come to me. I can prove that because I have all those things in my Git repository. And I actually have tests written for it, so it actually does the same. So let's go through it. The first thing that I did was I extracted the address component from the class. So what I did was I made sure that my class person only has one specific purpose. And the purpose of this class, can somebody tell me? Say it again? Something with friends, right? Sorry, it's it's a little bit far to hear. So yeah, it's actually keeping a list of all your friends. That's really what this class is about. That's what it does, nothing more. So the address, that's something very separate. I don't need to know about the address in this class. I'll have a separate component for address so I can reuse it somewhere else. And it's a lot clearer as well. It immediately leaves me with only one constructor as well. So there's no problem anymore. I immediately know how to create this object. The next thing that I've done is, you know the add? Subtle change. I just made it an add friend. At least I know who I'm adding. It's not an enemy. It's not a neighbor, it's not family. Maybe we want to extend the class afterwards to add family as well and keep a list of family. But so I just changed it to add friend. That's all I did. Actually, I did something else as well. I made sure that my list was actually a template now, and it returns a list of people or persons instead of just a list of objects. And then the last thing I did was I added a comment. And I don't really like comments all that much because code should be self-documenting and should be clear all by itself. But sometimes it's actually very useful. And especially here, because this is not about the closest friend. This is not about your best friend that you want to get. This is the friend who lives closest to you. That's a very different purpose. Imagine that I was actually starting to use that code as, who's your best friend? Okay, person.get closest friend. Well, it's not my best friend. It's the friend who happens to live right next to me. He might not even be my best friend at all, right? And also, there's something that I added here, and that's I added an exception. So it wasn't even visible in the previous, because this is a runtime exception, so it wasn't even visible in the previous implementation. So yes, I changed this code a little bit. And as I said, it does exactly the same thing. And the only thing that I've done is I applied really common software engineering practices. Practices that come from the book Clean Code. You probably heard about it because that was one of the few things that I could understand from the previous presentation. I don't speak Polish, unfortunately. So it comes from clean code and comes from principles like solid principles for object-oriented programming. And that's all I did. I didn't use any agile methods. I didn't use anything specific, but I needed to do this for this class to be maintainable. Actually, for being able to work as a team on it, for being able to just give it to somebody else so that they could change it. So let's look at the second thing, building the right piece of software. So what do we need to do to build the right piece of software? How can we know that we're building the right thing? Just by testing it, right? So we kind of want to test it. We want to include some automated tests. So how are we going to do that? Let's look at some piece of code again. Now, this is a different class. This is a class that is actually extracted from the first version of the person that I showed you. So when you look at it right now, you see that a couple of those things come back, right? So in the constructors, for instance, you still have those different types of constructors to have, basically to create different addresses depending on the information that you have. You can create one for country alone. You can create one when you know the city and the country, and so on. And then the last thing, you probably see that I changed some things in that already as well while extracting it. Instead of an S, a Z, and a couple of other letters, I actually made it a lot more clear. I also, instead of making public variables or public fields, I made it into getter methods so that my address could not be changed from underneath me, right? So that I'm absolutely certain that this class is not going to be abused. The other thing that I did was I opened up get geographical location. Now that was a method that was not visible in my very first implementation of person. Why? Because it was used internally. You needed to know the geographical location to calculate the distance between different friends. And calculating the distance between different friends was really what was necessary, or what was the exposed method in the person class. But get geographical location was not necessary, because it wouldn't mean anything, right? If you get the geographical location of a person, what would that mean? Where the person is right now? Where he lives, where he's born, right? Where he studies, where he works? I have no clue, right? So, but for an address, it totally makes sense. So I opened it up. It's public now, which makes it a lot easier to test as well. And then the last thing I did was I kind of changed the method, which was called between. It gave back a double, right? Now it's the distance to in kilometers, and I added some comments as well. So this is more readable. This is definitely not the best code yet. But what I'm interested in is in testing this method, distance to. This is actually the only method that contains any kind of business logic. It's a calculation between two addresses, probably somehow based on this geographical location. But how do I test this? Does anybody know how to test this? Say it again? Unit tests. Yeah, of course. Fine, but how do you make sure that you can actually test this in a way that every single time it is the same? Somehow this class contains internally a mapping between an address and a geographical location, coordinates, a point, right? It gives a point back. Those are two coordinates, an x coordinate and a y coordinate. So somehow there's a mapping in there, and let's say that I map Poland to 0, 0. X is 0 and Y is 0. Greenwich, actually London, UK is 0, 0, but okay, let's say London, UK is 0, 0. And then I say Gdansk in Poland is, I would know, probably like 3,000 by 200 or 400, something like that. I really have no clue. But let's say that we update, we have some new information. And instead of 3,000, it's suddenly 3,200 and as a DX coordinate. My test will suddenly not work anymore. So I need to somehow find a way to ensure that get geographical location always returns the same thing, especially for my test. And I don't want to test get geographical location, I want to test the distance too. So how do I do that? Well, again, I do some refactoring and I kind of look at this class, and when I really look at this class, I kind of see that it again serves two different purposes. One is it holds all the components of an address to identify a specific address. It allows me to create an address based on a couple of unlimited information, basically. That's what it does. And, but also, it does a lookup of a geographical location based on address. So maybe I need to extract that. So yeah, there I go back again into my office, making sure that this sign is on the door, that nobody comes disturbing me. And after I'm done coding, I added a couple of extra things. So what I did was, and this is also not the best code, and the reason why I did it this way is because I didn't want to introduce dependency injection. I thought it would be too much of a message for a half an hour presentation. But dependency injection was something that was introduced in the last session. That was another word that I understood. So I did it a slightly different way. It's kind of the same, but it's not really using dependency injection. So what it does is I created a static method on my class address to allow me to actually configure my address with a specific service. And the service is there to basically find the geographical location based on an address. And that's the only thing that this service does. Now, by doing this, it suddenly allows me to do something totally different. And when I actually test this distance to, and this is a very simple message, when I test this distance to, I can say address set address locator. So instead of depending on the internals of address, I can actually set my own address locator. And I created an address locator which is very simple. It uses Poland as the center of the universe, which is obvious. You all know that. So what it really does, this mock that I created there, what it really does is whenever there is an address that is in Poland, it returns 0, 0, center of the universe. Whenever there's an address elsewhere, it returns 1,000, 0. So it's 1,000 kilometers away from here. Even though Canada is a little bit further, I know, because I was still there yesterday. So, so address set locator, I can create my Polish address, and then I suddenly can assert that 1,000 is really the distance that I get back between the address in Poland and the address in Canada. So again, the only thing that I did right here was use solid principles to make sure that my classes only had one single responsibility. That's the S in solid, right? I also made sure, and that's in the previous actually, by the getters, by using the getters, made sure that it was open for extension but closed for change. And so that's the O in solid and a couple of other things. So, so just by using standard and common software engineering practices and not rocket science, right? I think you all know that. Not rocket science. I made this class testable and I made this class readable as well so that we actually can change it. So what I've done is to enable us to work like a team or work together as a team, to enable us to build the right thing, to actually be able to test it, we had to use software engineering principles. So what I'm actually saying is that in order to apply Agile at all, you first need to write good code. If you can't, if you don't write good code, you can't change it. It's not maintainable. You won't be Agile. Agile is not about releasing something fast for the first time and then waiting for 6 months before you can release something else. Agile is about being able to release new functionality every week or so, or every 2 weeks, right? And when I give classes, and I regularly do, when I give classes and I talk about this concept, then I typically compare it to Lego. Do you all know what Lego is, right? I used to play a lot with Lego, and I wish I could more now. I have a niece again, so in a couple of years I probably will. So when I first got my Lego box, I got a big Lego box with all different pieces, an instruction sheet, and a big card that I needed to build. And this box contained all those pieces in individual compartments in the box, right? And I used my instruction sheet, and I took the pieces from the box, and I built that car, and it was done in what, half an hour to an hour maybe? And then after that was built once, I threw all of those pieces in one big curver box, a really big one, where all my other Lego box pieces were together as well. How long did it take me next time to build it, you think? At least twice as long, right? Exactly the same with code that is not readable, right? So in order to move fast, you need to make sure that your code is understandable, works well. You can change it in a way that it ruins everything else, because otherwise the only thing you're going to do is debug and not being able to release it all. So this is really what my message was about. And if you think that the examples that I gave in terms of how to improve your code, if you think that that's yeah, it's only bad programmers that give that. Now, why is it that Google returns, what is it? 56 million results when you ask for your code smells, right? 56 million results. And why is it that Zazzle actually has t-shirts like this, right? So everybody's code smells, right? Everybody does. And it really does, and it's historical. So it's because of the pressure and so on. So if there's any product owners or BAs in the room as well, or PMs, when your developers say, hey, I really need to refactor this code, this is not because they're just like perfectionists. It might be, but this is not generally the case. It really is to help you in ensuring that in the future, they can still deliver that code fast. They can still meet the schedule. They can still make sure that they deliver the features for you, right? So when you look again at the Agile Manifesto, you think like, why the hell did they not write it in there? If software engineering, if quality of code, if intrinsic quality, if software craftsmanship is so important, why didn't they write it in the Agile Manifesto in the first place? Well, it's somewhat hidden. When you look at the top over there, then you see that we developed better ways of developing software, or we found better ways of developing software. And there's another thing that they say, by doing it and helping others do it. So those people were already writing software. The people who wrote the Agile Manifesto, and I know a few, is Uncle Bob is one, Alistair Coburn is one, James Grenning is one. Some of those still write code today. And they are software craftsmen. So they just assumed that everybody who was a programmer did the same thing. They wanted to write good code. That's why they didn't add this thing. So the only thing that I really want to leave you with, and I know that my time is almost done, the thing that I want to leave you with is, forget about Agile. Forget about those processes. Forget about Scrum and Kanban and all of those other things if you cannot write good code first, right? You really need to excel at software engineering before you can go fast. Processes are helpful, but they're not the end-all and be-all. You really need the good software, the good code as well, as a great foundation. So that was my message. I lead the Agile Competency Center at EPAM. EPAM is a sponsor here, so if you want to get in touch with me, I'll be around today or tomorrow. Around Agile or anything, right? Agile or software craftsmanship. We also have a booth somewhere, so stop by, and I think there's a couple of Java questions in there as well. If you want to test, if you want to test yourself on your Java writing skills. So that's it. Is there any questions? Oh yeah. Wait a second. Dziękuję.